The other side of the constitutional carry debate this week. It's Mitchell Talks, the News 9 sessions with Aaron Brilbeck. This guy has covered this issue at the Capitol like nobody else, and we really started. We'll show you fair and balanced, right?
Fair and balanced.
You want to introduce our guests and tell our viewers what we're seeing today?
I can. We've got to have you guys introduce yourselves because you're better at it than I am.
I'm Devin Hughes, president of GVpedia.
And I'm Audrey Burrow, a local group leader for Moms Demand Action here in Oklahoma.
And what we're going to be talking about today is it's not constitutional carry, it's permitless carry. And there's a difference. Constitutional carry is across the board. As long as you're 18 years and older and don't have a felony, you can carry without a license, without training.
99% of the media says constitutional carry, though, right?
Right. And it's a pretty common mistake. This is permitless carry, so there's some exceptions to it. So, for example, you're still not able to carry in the Capitol. You won't be able to carry into police stations. Can't carry on universities. And they've written in a few different places where you can't carry into the bill. And let's talk about that first, if you guys don't mind. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, obviously you guys are opposed to permitless carry, but let's take it as far as what this particular bill entails.
Right. You want to take that?
This particular bill, like you said, it doesn't allow for carry into some private businesses or college campuses, unlike the bill last year. And I think the intention behind that was to get the business community and education community off the backs of the opposition for this bill. So they've appeased a segment of the community that was against it last year.
It's kind of a misnomer too, because if I put up a sign in my store window that says no guns allowed, that doesn't really carry in weight of law. What that means is that if somebody comes in with a gun, I can ask them to leave. If they don't leave, I can call the police and have them removed. They can face a trespassing charge. But it doesn't carry any weight of law. I don't get arrested for carrying a gun into a store that has a sign up that says no guns allowed.
Correct. Yeah, it's basically a misdemeanor, which means that if you go ahead and carry into that and are dumb enough basically to just not leave when the owner asks you, it's misdemeanor. You're still allowed to keep your guns and then continue doing that again.
But it's not a gun charge, it's a trespassing charge.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. I mean, that was written into there because there were some concerns from the business community as far as people being forced to allow folks in with guns if they don't want them in with guns.
Right, and my guess is in the coming legislative seasons they'll be returning to that and removing the exceptions as they can. And because we've seen a steady progression from, well, first it was concealed carry, then kind of loosening the amount of training required, and then now we're going to go for permitless carry, and then we're going to have guns everywhere. And so it's just a steady, basically degrading of Oklahoma's gun safety laws.
So you think this will eventually go to constitutional?
I think they'll definitely try.
Let me ask you guys to help us understand your stake in this. I mean, we had the gentleman from OK2A a couple of weeks ago. How did you come, Devin, let's start with you. How did you come to do, or how to be in this position to be talking about this issue?
Right, so I started after the Sandy Hook tragedy and started doing research on the various gun laws and gun policies in the U.S. And also, I mean, I hadn't studied the issue too much before, realized that Oklahoma, we're currently the 11th, I believe, in the country in terms of the highest gun death rate. And that's actually a slight decrease from the 2016 when we were, I think, fifth? Yeah, we had gotten all the way up to fifth. And so our gun laws are significantly weaker than the rest of the country, and this is simply an extension of that. And when you actually look at the stats on permitless carry, you find that the states that have enacted permitless carries have seen their gun deaths increase significantly more than the rest of the country. And so for me, it's all about trying to save lives.
Audrey, your stake in this discussion.
I joined Moms Demand Action almost a year ago to the day. I participated in their advocacy day last year, and I joined because after the Parkland tragedy, I realized that my daughter, who I just enrolled in pre-K, was going to grow up doing active shooter drills, and in fact she's already done a few in her pre-K class. And I find that unacceptable. And I was drawn to Moms Demand Action because they are grassroots in nature and are goals and policies are nonpartisan, and they make sense. You know, we want to keep guns out of the hands of people with dangerous histories. We support reasonable limitations on where guns can be carried, and like Devin said, we want to save as many lives as possible. You know, over 100 people die of gun violence every day, and that's unacceptable.
How would permitless carry, though, reduce those numbers? So in other words, you know, the person that is going to go and shoot up a school isn't going to say, oh, it's a gun-free zone, I better not go and do it.
Right, so I mean, the idea that mass shooters target gun-free zones is a myth. Largely, they have an emotional connection with the place. And you find that when looking at active shooter incidents, more cases have been stopped by civilians without guns than civilians with guns. So the whole idea that it requires a gun to stop somebody is not the case, and oftentimes you can have situations where there's crossfire, particularly if you have somebody who hasn't had the necessary training. I mean, you're putting them into an active shooter situation, bullets are flying, it's entirely unclear like who the shooter might be. And particularly, let's say you have two people concealed carrying and they haven't had much training. How are you supposed to tell who the bad guy in that situation is? And the answer is you really aren't. So it has as much risk of causing confusion and adding to more tragedy than actually stopping a tragedy. And that's even excluding the cases where you have accidental shootings or the permitless carrier trying to stop a crime that actually wasn't a crime and just involving themselves in certain situations. It can also increase gun theft because they'll often leave their firearms in cars or just leave them around the house not stored properly. And those guns then end up on the street and contribute to crime as well.
Wouldn't that be the same case, though, with folks who have permits? Because right now, I mean, I think we can all agree that the training that folks get to get their carry license is minimal at best.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, my question would be, why don't we make the training better? You know, what the permit does today is it creates an enforcement mechanism. A police officer, if you're carrying, can ask to see your permit. And you show it to them. If you don't, that's, you know, an issue. But if they show you your permit, they know you've gone through a background check and you've had safety training. And now police can't do anything until they either have reasonable suspicion that you're about to commit a crime or you've already committed that crime, and it's too late.
Well, to be fair, they can't ask for the permit just at random. There has to be reasonable suspicion there too, right?
Right, but you do have to know, like, there's cause to believe that, like, hey, this person's gone through a background check and some training, because with permitless carry, it's like, well, there's no guarantee they've had any training whatsoever. So as a police officer, that makes the situation less safe because you have the possibility of this person's untrained and has a firearm. Like, they might make a wrong move just purely by accident. And also there has to be a background check currently, whereas if after permitless carry you do a private sale where no background check is required, then you can carry that firearm. And so that also leads to an extra situation where, well, this person could be dangerous or a criminal, and there's no easy way for the police officer to check in terms of whether they have a permit or not, because, like, if they don't have a permit right now, it's like, okay, that's a major red flag and they're carrying a firearm. They should be on their guard, whereas without the permit, it's far more problematic.
I'll play devil's advocate, though. I mean, it's a 5 or 10 year permit currently. Within that 5 or 10 years, I can commit a felony. If I'm 21 years old, I'm especially with that age group that I can commit a felony, but I've still got the permit that I can show to the officer. So it doesn't really, it's not like there's a regular updating of the background check.
Well, what should happen is the permit should be revoked. Now, we know far too often it's not.
Right.
But again, that's a case for strengthening the laws, not saying, okay, well, this law is not sufficient, we should completely remove it. I mean, it's kind of like somebody saying that our driving, the testing process for getting a car permit or being able to drive, that's not sufficient, therefore we should have no sort of training or classes required. And would you feel more or less safe knowing that there's the potential for many of the drivers out there to have had absolutely no experience behind the wheel?
And that's a valid argument. I'm monopolizing. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, I'll just.
That's a valid argument.
Bring
But
me some coffee or something.
I've taken the course, and frankly, the class sucks. There's not much to it, and it's the type of training where it's almost non-existent anyhow. So it's akin to, you know, the argument is you wouldn't let somebody without training drive a car. Well, the comparison that I would give is the training that I would give you to drive a car is don't run people over. Here's your license.
Right.
And that's basically what we're getting right now with the carry permit. So is the training really that crucial? The training that's currently involved in the carry permit that crucial that it makes people that much safer?
So I would definitely say it makes people less safe not having that sort of training, and it also at least gets somebody into the mindset to where, like, hey, I should probably have more training, whereas basically the message we're sending now is irresponsible gun ownership, that's just fine. Like, here's your gun, have fun with it, basically, rather than trying to instill a culture of responsibility. I agree, the current class sucks. There should be definitely more training that's required. But again, the solution is to make sure there's more training, not just remove the requirement whatsoever, basically.
Jason Dunnington is over there, and you know, we've watched, he's really been very vocal against this permitless carry, okay? And you know, this conversation goes on decade after decade, year after year. We hear people say, we should be investing more in mental health, and we should be, it never, ever happens. It never happens, okay? I mean, it's a punchline for the media and politicians, and then the next tragedy comes along and people forget about it. And let me ask you about the politics of this, and you know where this train is going. If I ask Dunnington, is this bill going to wind up law in Oklahoma? He knows it's going to, okay?
He's shrugging his shoulders.
He's shrugging his shoulders. That great job on like hedging your bets, but it's going to happen, all right? So my question to you is, where do we take this conversation? Besides the conversations come up and the press does the headlines, and then the issue goes away, and you're doing your work, and people are really dug in on both sides of this, right? I mean, this is a polarizing issue. So step outside of your organizations as a person and say, what do we need to go from your standpoint? You're concerned as a mother. You're understanding this happening in all of the states. Where do we need to go that we've not, as media and the public, have not been?
I don't know if this is a direct answer to your question, but for my part, it'll be really important for us to encourage and share our gun safety education program and safe gun storage, so that the more people are carrying their guns around, as long as they're safely storing them at home, you know, that's going to be even more important to educate gun owners on. And then also I'd like to turn the conversation to things like red flag laws that would allow for people to petition a judge if they had a concern that a gun owner was going to harm themselves or someone else, and the judge could remove the guns from them for a period of time, have a court session, and they could argue to have them back, or they might not get them back. And as more people are carrying and owning guns, I think that's going to be a really important conversation to have.
Is there a lot of pushback against those red flag laws, do you think?
Yes, there is pushback. They make a lot of sense to me. I think these make a lot of sense to some, but again, the whole due process. But in other states, it has worked. It has prevented suicides and violence. And so I think the due process is there. We just have to educate our lawmakers and the public about them.
The fact is, with mental illness, and we've known this from case after case, with mental illness, sometimes people will have a break. Today they're fine, tomorrow they're not. And
Right.
Oftentimes it's family members or friends or neighbors who see that break before law enforcement does.
Right, and one of
Exactly.
the things, particularly with suicide, is we find that gun ownership is a higher risk factor than mental illness, in fact, simply because of the lethality. And so I definitely think there needs to be far more involved with educating people. And also, and when you look at the stats, like I think Survey USA did a poll that found 81% of Oklahomans oppose permitless carry. But then when you look at the vote in the House and the Senate, it looks like it should be the opposite. And so there is a very big disconnect between what the public thinks on these issues and what our legislators think the public thinks on those issues. And I've had many conversations with staunch NRA supporters, and I'll be like, all right, do you support like red flag laws, some form of universal background check, safe storage laws? And they're all like, yes, yes, yes. And it's like, all right, well, then you agree with me more than the NRA. And they're like, huh. And so there really is a disconnect between like the corporate gun lobby in Washington and what people actually think is reasonable in terms of gun safety.
And then also elevating the voices of those opposed to these measures. You know, for the longest time, it's been a very vocal minority that supports things like permitless carry. So it's our job to help elevate voices of the opposition.
So why do you think, given that, why do you think it's passing now? Why do you think it's going through?
Lawmakers are scared of getting an F grade from the NRA. And it's just seen as like, well, if you oppose permitless carry, then you're anti-gun. It's like, no, I'm pro-gun safety and making sure there's reasonable restrictions and training and safety standards, and this is basically a race to the bottom, and it will cost Oklahoman lives, unfortunately.
Devin, how do people find out about your organization?
So our website is gvpedia.org. We do have a Facebook page called GVpedia as well, and so we have a social media presence there.
And Audrey, your group, how do people find out more about what you folks represent and want to do?
Sure, they can look us up online, momsdemandaction.org. They can also text READY to 64433 to see when the next local, anywhere they are, they can text that number to see where the next local event is. And then on February 26th, we are having a big group at the Capitol for our 2019 Advocacy Day, starting at 9 a.m. And anyone that is concerned with these issues and wants to promote more gun violence prevention measures can join us.
Well, thanks very much for being here. We really appreciate you. And now we've done both sides.
And that's important.
And by the way, if this is y'all's first time on TV, y'all did really good.
Yeah, I was impressed.
Thank you.
Really, really good. All right, thanks to you both. Thank you, Mr. Brilbeck. Oh, hi there. See these again at news9.com/YourVoteCounts. Follow me on Twitter at MitchellTalks. See you next week.